Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Chrissy Satchel, and I'm the Director of Education Outreach and Diversity at the NSF Center for Genetically Encoded Materials, otherwise known as CGEM, which is a National Science Foundation funded Center for Chemical Innovation. I'm going to be talking to you all today as part of the CERU Research Symposium, a little bit about some pilot data I have regarding the relationship between sense of belonging and mentorship. And then I'm going to lead into some questions about what these data entail and potentially how we can use these to help shift the academic climate of certain STEM departments or communities. So I'm going to start off by just showing some data from the Pew Research Center, sort of comparing or highlighting the disparity between the percentage of individuals who make up STEM jobs or who have STEM jobs in the US. And you can see that the number of individuals that identify as Black, Hispanic, Asian, or other are much lower or have much lower representation in STEM jobs than those who identify as white. And this is not just a few percentage points. This is a huge disparity between around 70% of jobs being taken up by white identifying individuals and less than 20%, less than 10% in some cases, of jobs taken up by Black or Hispanic identifying individuals. Additionally, there's a plot that just came out also in the same study by Pew about women and how they remain underrepresented. So there's data from the 90s all the way up to 2019 showing the percentage of women in certain STEM fields. So you can see that in health-related fields, they actually make up approximately 75% of workers. But in all the other fields, they are less than 50% of the people who take up those STEM jobs. And actually in computer science and engineering, women have consistently made up less than, around 30%, but in engineering, less than 20%. So there's definitely a representation and lack of diversity issue in STEM. And so one of the things that I've been trying to understand is why that disparity exists. And one of the reasons is that when we think of diversity, we tend to think just of numbers. And we don't necessarily relate that to the environment or how inclusive one can feel or how included one can feel in a certain environment. So I want to introduce this concept of deficit thinking, which basically puts the onus on women and peers or persons excluded because of their ethnicity or race, suggesting that they're the ones that lack interest or that lack preparation for a career in STEM. And so this kind of leads to, let's just hire more diverse individuals and let's maybe fix the student or the trainee and get them better prepared to enter college or to enter a STEM career. But it doesn't necessarily sort of fix the problems that exist in the community that makes it inclusive or not. And so all that deficit thinking does is improve representation numerically, but it continues to marginalize students from diverse backgrounds or trainees from diverse backgrounds. And so one of my goals is to help figure out how to make institutions and communities themselves more inclusive so that when we do hire more diverse individuals, they feel welcome and valued by their community. So one of the aspects of academic membership that contributes to retention is sense of belonging. So this is an aspect of academic membership linked to identity, not so much intellect or capacity. And it's as I mentioned, is one of the major predictors of retention in STEM. So sense of belonging encompasses feeling accepted and included by a community, feeling socially connected to the peers and colleagues in that community. It impacts academic self-efficacy, motivation, engagement, and achievement in STEM or in whatever field you're in. And then it sort of encompasses the feeling that your presence and contributions to a certain community are valued and that you are a member that is essential and committed to a certain community and contributing in a way that's valued. So this is from one of my previous research papers, but it's somebody feeling a sense of belonging and showing that by saying that they're glad that they're valued by the department because the meeting was productive. Okay, so sense of belonging in general is pretty well studied in K through 12 and undergrad students. It's not very well understood in graduate students or postdocs, and it's even less understood among faculty. And graduate culture is very different from K through 12 or undergraduate culture. So understanding some of the reasons or factors that contribute to sense of belonging among graduate students, postdocs, and faculty is really important. And just to give you some examples of how graduate culture is unique. So by the time you're a PhD student or a master's student, you are expected to problem solve independently, the load of teaching is way higher. So you are more independent as a teacher and you're expected to take charge over your classroom or over grading, etc., which can be very intimidating. There are unclear measures of success. So we don't have, we have GPAs, but we don't really have letter grades anymore because your ultimate goal is to write a dissertation or a thesis. Your social connectedness tends to come more from your research group than from classroom settings or from dorms, for example, as an undergrad. And then you depend on 1 or 2 faculty members to get your degree. So that's very different from undergrad, where you tend to have more classes and more faculty to interact with and more opportunities to essentially get a better grade or improve in your coursework. So in my doctoral research, I focused on this sort of aspect of sense of belonging among graduate communities. And I wanted to understand what factors of sense of belonging or what factors of the academic climate and culture correlate positively and negatively with sense of belonging in general. I also wanted to understand what some of the prominent factors contributing to sense of belonging are among graduate students, postdoctoral researchers, and faculty, and whether the factors that contribute to sense of belonging in each of those groups are the same or different. Just a quick recap of what I found. Grad students and postdocs find it easier to talk about their own science with their own group or research group members than with members from other research groups. They sometimes feel valued by their advisors. They don't always feel confident or independent. Those who identify as underrepresented feel less like they belong. And those who are in year 6 or older, or those that are postdocs, actually feel the lowest amount of sense of belonging within their community. Faculty tend to not talk to other faculty about their research, so that actually mirrors the finding in grad students and postdocs. Faculty also sometimes feel valued by their department. They tend to feel inadequate compared to their peers. They actually, this is interesting, they believe that they are good mentors, but they know that they are not good mentors to all of their students. So that encompasses all identities and backgrounds. And they have the highest sense of belonging. And then in general, everybody feels like an imposter pretty frequently. Everyone has trouble feeling happy and accepted, and everyone frequently feels less productive and scientifically successful than their peers. And if you want to see the paper, you can scan that QR code in the corner. So I was particularly interested by this sort of the feeling of inadequacy and comparing yourself to other peers, and then also understanding this disparity between believing that faculty themselves believe that they are good mentors, but they know that that's not true with all of their students. And I sort of wanted to try and understand whether the aspects of teaching a mentee and helping them improve in science would help mentors' own feeling of inadequacy and sort of that comparison to peers, and then dive a little bit deeper into this understanding of how knowing that you're not a good mentor to all students could contribute negatively to sense of belonging. So this led to my new research questions. So knowing that imposter phenomenon negatively impacts sense of belonging, and knowing that the ability to be a good mentor to all students also contributes negatively to sense of belonging, leads me to think that mentoring and receiving satisfactory mentoring is important for fostering sense of belonging. It's my hypothesis. And so my research questions are whether there actually are aspects of the mentoring experience that correlate positively and maybe negatively with sense of belonging, and how can we use these data to help incentivize mentoring and improve mentoring interactions in general. So my methods are, for right now, for this pilot data, just a survey, and I use a visual narrative, which is essentially cartoons, because they convey emotional context and emotional comprehension better than text can. And so these are the themes that I included in the survey. So mentoring, academic support, teaching, social connectedness, and self-perceptions of success. So some examples of these for mentoring questions are somebody thinking they're ready to mentor a young student, somebody having a question about their mentoring and that they're going to ask the research advisor for help because their advisor is helpful. Some of the teaching examples are my peers get more opportunities to mentor young students than I do, and this person feeling sad about that. And then this person feeling very happy about the fact that teaching and mentoring are valued in their research group. So some of the self-perceptions of success questions include somebody giving a presentation and thinking to themselves that they feel their peers see them as a serious scholar. And then somebody kind of feeling down about the fact that they think their peers are more productive and scientifically successful than I am. And I used some of the same questions from my previous study because of the high reliability that these questions had and correlation to the central construct of sense of belonging, which is what I will talk about next. So the question for each of these cartoons was the same. It asked respondents to relate to the situation and basically how much they relate that to their current experience in the Department of Chemistry. So some of these questions are positively worded and negatively worded. And so the important aspect of that is that I basically have to backwards code the negatively worded ones so that they fall onto this overall construct of sense of belonging. And basically this happens as like post-processing of the data. And the reason I care about this construct is because this directly maps onto a sense of belonging scale where the questions that are most difficult to relate with require higher sense of belonging in order to answer them as somebody who fully relates to that situation. And I used item response theory to analyze all that data specifically because this helps all of the questions relate back to this central construct of sense of belonging. And the really cool thing about item response theory is that it's a probabilistic model, which means that everybody's performance on the survey is a function of their own ability, or that's what we call the sort of construct factor. So in this case, that's sense of belonging. And it's also a function of item difficulty or how hard this item is to relate with. And based on that information, item response theory basically outputs a list of all the factors that shape sense of belonging in that given community. So what does this actually look like? I got 139 responses from this pilot data from the UC Berkeley Department of Chemistry. 130 of those were graduate students and 9 of them were postdocs. So as we go up this arrow, we're going up this way. These are the ones on the bottom, the responses on the bottom will be the easiest that in general a community found were easiest to relate with. And up at the top will be the ones that were more difficult or most difficult to relate with. So for example, these two at the bottom. So this asking lab mates for advice about mentoring, they are always helpful, came out as one of the easiest situations for the community to relate with. And in contrast, asking my research advisor for advice about mentoring because they're always helpful came across as one of the most difficult situations for the community to relate with. So that's actually really interesting because students or graduate students and postdocs in general find it easier to ask their lab mates for advice about mentoring than they find asking their research advisor for advice about mentoring. Okay, so going now from the easiest to the most difficult. The next easiest was feeling happy and accepted, which is fantastic to see. Feeling like an essential member of my research group. That was also fairly easy for respondents to agree with. Respondents in general feel that they have equal opportunities to mentor younger students, which is great. They feel that they are seen as a serious scholar. They also feel that their contributions to their research group are valued. They feel on average like they are good mentors, and actually compared to the prior data I showed, it suggests that graduate students and postdocs find it harder to believe they're good mentors than faculty find it hard to be a good mentor. So that's actually pretty interesting. In general, students and postdocs feel that their teaching and mentoring are valued in their research group. They feel like they find it most challenging or pretty challenging to feel like an independent or confident scientist. And these are sort of getting up to the top of most difficult to relate with. So being ready to mentor a younger student is one of the most difficult things for students to agree with. Another one that's most difficult is having clear direction and knowing what to do in lab just as much as their peers do. And then the last two that are the most difficult for this community are feeling adequate compared to peers and feeling as productive and scientifically successful as peers. So imposter phenomenon is still pretty prevalent in this community, and this shows that a lot of students and postdocs feel that way. And then it also suggests that talking about mentoring with faculty and feeling ready to mentor a young student are also pretty challenging aspects of sense of belonging for students and postdocs. And so I correlated these responses with whether the respondent had actually mentored a younger student. And it shows that respondents who have been a mentor tend to, on average, feel a greater sense of belonging than those who have not mentored a younger student. And that difference was statistically significant. So with that, I'm going to leave you with some discussion questions for us to talk about during my session at the conference. So in general, do you find these results surprising? Do they help understand the influence of mentoring on the mentor? And if they don't, what can I add to the study to sort of help understand that relationship a little bit better? What mentoring practices might help improve mentor sense of belonging? Is this something that advisors can work on to help their students, or is it something students can do? What might mentoring impact one's feeling of being essential to their research group, or how might, So how might teaching somebody else about your science help you feel more essential to your research group? How might the statements that are most difficult to relate with impact academic productivity and or success for trainees in STEM? What other questions might be useful to ask? And do you think these data can help incentivize mentoring or teaching mentors about the importance of sense of belonging? And so I am super excited to get to talk with these data, with you all about these data, and then figure out sort of where to go next and what some next steps for this research might be. So I want to thank CGEM and our director, Alana Shepards, and then the managing director of the center, Sarah Smaga, who I work with really closely. And then I want to thank the College of Chemistry and Chemistry Graduate Life Committee team who helped me get these pilot data out. So that's Dan Brower, Hikaru Mizuno, Jamie Gleason, Sonia Boomen, and Ann Berenger. Thank you. I'm excited to talk with you all.